I just noticed it's the same cover.
Oh, well, yeah, because this lo-fi girl is pretty iconic at this point. She has become the visual representation of lo-fi as a as a vibe.
You think this person exists out in the world?
Yeah, because there is this weird effect where like life affects art and art affects life.
Hmm. Well, but do you think they existed before it came out? Like, was this is this a real person?
Well, I believe that all representations are kind of you combine aspects of things that you like, right?
Hmm.
So I believe this is like a bunch of aspects about things that they've experienced,
Hmm.
right? And it has never existed quite like in this way before, but through the rendition of an artist, you're able to see that representation.
Okay, I get you.
And because you see the representation, I feel like it makes it more likely to become real.
Hmm.
You know, someone will actually look at all that stuff and be like, hey, that's
This.
basically me. Why not just go all the way and become that person? You know,
I
they get
see.
the same cat and
Get
everything.
the bangs. The Garfield ass cat over there.
Yeah.
Is she journaling or is she doing homework?
See, this whole thing. I believe, to me, the way that I interpret all this is kind of like college culture that kind of like breeds
Mm.
outwards, right, into reality.
Yeah, yeah, I get you. I get you.
You know how like Facebook was just created for like Harvard, right?
It's at first just Harvard, yeah, and specifically it was like networks of schools, so you needed a .edu email to join, and then it would open up certain .edus.
Right. And
Yeah,
I mean, I feel like it made like a lot of sense for a school like at that time, but then it also kind of like makes sense for like everybody everywhere, right?
yeah.
And so eventually it seeped out and took over culture.
Well, and then I think it's one of those things too about uh, like the artist's intent being changed, because at least not from any legitimate historical resource, but from the Social Network movie. Uh,
Okay, that's I'm gonna hold that in mind.
that was the intent of sharing that. Uh, the goal, it seemed, was to create a sense of exclusivity to it, and so that the audience will want it more because they're not allowed in. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I don't know like how like extremely conscious that played out in real life. I feel like movies they kind of amalgamate like real experiences. Like perhaps like those are like philosophical questions that like he was thinking over for a while.
At that time, I mean, I can see it being explicit, especially with like apps. Your launch strategy is a very specific thing you lay out. You know,
Okay.
um, like
But I mean like I don't know if he thought that it was gonna take over like everybody's lives the way it did.
no, yeah, yeah. I don't think he foresaw that, and I do think the initial goal was to create this like yearbook kind of thing for the different universities, where you have all the people on there. And then the NSA contacted him and told him, "You just created the greatest tool ever," funded him, and now we have spies on our phones at all times and in our houses.
Sweet.
Yeah.
All right. So before we get into why lo-fi is evil, let me explain how why I think it permeated culture the way it did. So I I see it as like kind of like coming from like a lot of people like having to study in college but not knowing what to listen to.
Hmm.
Because you know how they say that like classical music is something that you should listen while you're studying.
Yeah. Yeah, I've
Well,
heard that.
I mostly think it's because it's instrumental mostly.
Hmm.
I feel like it's mostly like lyrics
Yeah,
that distract you
and
because they have meaning, and they get you like to think about them because you have to like hear and interpret them, and that's already like parts of your brain that should be used for reading books, right?
could it also be not just the song has meanings, but the it's using the same vehicle to communicate meaning as what you're trying to do with your homework and work. So language, words, that's what you're trying to interpret and understand when you're reading a book or when you're writing. a paper or
Yeah.
writing stuff down, and so having that and then trying to do the same thing with lyrics becomes a difficult part. Because like if you were trying to study music, it would be hard to do hearing another song, right?
Yeah.
Like you want to keep that sensory vehicle open to only the thing that you're trying to concentrate on.
Yeah, but that brings to mind the Bernie Sanders lo-fi mix. See, the vocals of it don't really distract too much from the music.
That's
I feel like
fair.
it melts very well, and that might just be because Bernie Sanders is an incredible,
Orator.
orator. But like he talks in like such a specific beat that
Yeah.
it's never off beat. It will always carry a tune.
There's also something to be said about the nature of a filibuster, because the goal isn't necessarily to say anything that makes super coherent sense, but to just keep talking and talking and talking so that we can't vote.
Yeah.
So I think that in that sense, it pairs really, really well with the lo-fi or with the music to study to philosophy, I guess.
Yeah. Well, now I'm actually interested to hear like what Bernie Sanders can talk about for 8 hours long, and like to see like how long it takes him to get like Super Bowl. But like he's like almost 80 years old, isn't he? Is he 80? He's like 78, right?
I think he's 79. He would be the oldest president to be elected,
I can imagine that
if elected.
he's had so much time in this world, he can at least come up with like 8 hours worth of sentences that don't like logically wrap together, right? I mean, I'm not saying that he did because I haven't listened to the whole 8 hours,
Yeah.
but I'm saying that if you're not going through like dementia or whatever, like 80 years is a long time. I feel like I could probably talk for like 3 hours without getting cyclical.
Yeah.
8 hours though, it's a lot. And I mean, there's some like filibusters that are like longer, right?
Yeah, I think the longest was like 12 hours. I'm pulling that straight out of my ass, so I wouldn't have much confidence in that one. But
Noted.
yeah, I think there's that, and I forgot who was it. Warren who did the filibuster on heels for like the longest time too.
Heels?
Heels, the shoe.
Heels the shoe?
Heels with the spike at the end of it.
Yeah, but what about it?
Oh, it was in the
Oh.
news about they did the first filibuster for X hours in heels because it gets pretty difficult to stand in heels after a while.
Was it like an empowering thing?
Yeah. It's like part of the
Interesting.
rise of women. What's the expression used nowadays? I don't know, but yeah, we also had that. There's always record breakers for filibusters,
I see that as like an aesthetic thing, kind of like a martyr, expressing physical pain as a point.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the filibuster too. Like having to just talk and bullshit for as long as you.
Yeah, but didn't like Ted Cruz read like Dr. Seuss books?
For the, I think he brought some out to drive his points home, but
also
then,
to waste time.
Yeah.
And he took his time like reading them.
Yep. Well, I mean,
I would say that shows different ways of taking things.
taking the filibuster. I would take a Bible. I think that would be what I would try to read for a long time. Give me 1 second to shut that off. The recording can't hear it. Or
Dude,
actually,
we don't have to do a whole bit about it. You already talked about it last time.
Oh, I did. That's true. I keep forgetting to do that. And we should make a checklist for. Well, I think we're getting closer and closer to arriving at a setup that is good forever. You get my drift.
Yeah, it's progress.
Yeah. So you do things more and more, you get used to how to do them.
Okay. Well, I mean, that brings to mind something that I was thinking about, right? So, I remember one time, like, I said, that Obamacare wasn't that big a deal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you got very defensive about Obamacare. And I think that, in many ways you're right? Like, to come from, like, more kind of like nothing to something is like an incredible task, and it's something that should really be commended, no matter what the thing ends up being, right? Because it still has to go through like the tests of reality, and in that scenario, the test was the American democratic system, which ends up being the two-party system, which ends up being a bunch of things that have to go through the goalie, right? Just to get the whole thing passed.
Yeah.
So, in many ways, it's not idealistic, but it's still what we wanted, right? That was the hope.
Yeah, I think. Well, the question there is what we wanted. I think what we wanted first was to put down some law, right? Put down something on paper that says this is something we're gonna do now. We're gonna manage healthcare at a federal level and regulate it at a federal level versus, the as close to free for all world we were living in before. And just to have that concept be part of the law enables us to then have the conversation of, okay, how do we regulate it? How do we manage healthcare at this level and through these whatever sort of infrastructure we have to do it? You get me?
True. Yeah, and I completely understand that point, and seeing that like I would prefer like a more idealistic plan. I feel that the fact that it's even possible for all the candidates to be like giving their own version of what that plan should be. It wouldn't really be that way like if there wasn't something already in place.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. The discussion would be, should something be in place?
Yeah, and we wouldn't be getting as far.
Yeah.
We first need the initial like step.
Yep. You
right?
gotta. Is it government is a slow moving machine?
It seems so, but but it's designed with faults and all.
Yep. And I do think that's more a feature of the system than a fault of the system. It's purposely designed to move slow to make it difficult to.
It's also making it difficult for Republicans to repeal Obamacare, right?
Yes, that same vehicle is part of what's making it difficult for that. That and just how unpopular it is overall.
Yeah, to take away people's
yeah.
healthcare. Well, but like that's what happens, like when you don't have it, you don't know like whether you're gonna like miss it when it's gone, right?
Yeah.
But once you have it, you're not gonna want to like take it away.
Yep.
It's kind of like a dog, right? Like once it gets the ball, like it doesn't want to give it back.
Yeah. When it's like it's interesting too how politicized it got, because like we have in certain states they have Obamacare, but they're calling it something else.
Yeah, Republicare.
Yeah, well, I don't know if that's an official name, but yeah, like I forgot what state, but Vox's Weeds podcast was talking about it, and yeah, they called it something else, and it was an incredibly popular program, and yet like
I mean, isn't it just like the Affordable Care Act?
No, because the states kind of handle their markets on their own,
right?
And so you can call that market whatever you want. So like California, I think we're called HealthNet. Is the kind of way that we're managing it through here, I think. Something like that. I am not heavy into the weeds here, but yeah. So they were calling it something else, and intentionally like mislabeling us Obamacare to the point where like when they took polls of the people, they were for repealing Obamacare, but not for repealing the programs that the states put in place to enact Obamacare.
I see.
Yeah, it was very telling of how the human society works.
Yeah. I mean, I don't consider humans to be completely logical, and I feel like any system of reality that you come up with has to take into account the fact that you yourself aren't logical when you're creating it.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that's like a bigger part of my like way of codifying things.
it's slightly unfair because I think by instinct, human beings aren't entirely logical. But in terms of like when we sit down and want to be logical, we get pretty close. It feels like, Warren, that a lot of the equations and math of physics wouldn't occur if we weren't able to kind of set aside all of those parts of us that make us illogical.
Yeah, but I question like what was the motive to sit down in the first place? Like so far, the when I think of a lot of times when we had great progresses in scientific endeavor, it was due to war, and I don't consider war to be logical. And so, but I was talking about this before we were recording about, like, say, like during the Cold War, when there was a space race, and America was against the Soviets, and we had this ideal, like, educated through into us, like indoctrinated even, about we should focus our attention to like math and science and engineering, in order to beat the Soviets. And I see it as like a very like us versus them mentality, a very taking like kind of like manipulating like the fact that we're very tribal, in order to get the best out of us. And we did do a lot of progress in like math and science and things that I consider to be logical. But I also consider the fact that like in order for there to be like money and attention invested into that aspect of reality, there had to be that devil in red that was the Soviet Union.
Yeah, so I see what you're saying there. I would step at the one step removed, because while the us versus them isn't entirely logical, once we know that that is a feature of the human psyche, then the choices to be better than the them becomes logical. Does that make sense?
Better than the them? Well, no. The thing is, like, the logical thing is that there is no us and there's no them. We're all human beings. And there's no real like borders. Yeah. Those are all just like imaginary lines. But that's not how the world behaves, though. Like even though there's no like quantum particles to tell us like this is America, this is Mexico, there's border patrol agents that will take it seriously with guns, right? So there's things that are enacted in the physical world that are solely through subjective ideas.
Yeah, so there's behaviors and actions that are occurring because of these things that are illogical.
Yes.
And so you would say
illogical insofar as like you could freeze frame and study every like particle of physics that you know of, that and it can tell you every like physical condition that is in that area, right? Like you freeze frame like a border patrol agent pointing a gun at like some like Mexican family like crossing the border. You freeze frame everything. Nothing about like I don't know everything, so perhaps there is some like morality particle, but like nothing about the physical world will tell you why certain things are going on. It's mostly like these subjective ideas that are telling someone to do something. The same things that can cause like stock markets to crash if people stop believing that there's going to be like money in it, right? If everybody's like pulls their money out of the bank at the same time, banks collapse.
So yes, I think I get the line of kind of thinking you're going through there. There's like I can't wrap my head around essentially what I'm trying to think through here. Because you said a couple things there. So we had the example of the border patrol agent pointing a gun at people because of this illogical conclusion they've made that this border exists. That conclusion comes from innate need to have a community and to have an outside the community that has been evolved into us through, you know, years and years of different ways of organizing your species to, propagate survival. And to me, well, you're right. Like the us versus them is an illogical perception of the world. How we arrive to it is still fairly logical. And how we handle its illogicalness still seems to me very logical as well, though subjective. But it's subjective because of, I think, our inability to perceive the underlying reality of it. But essentially, in those issues of border disputes and these things, where no government is under the illusion that there is some, America particle, and as soon as you step here, now this is America. There are border disputes all the time. Not so much, and I mean, there are disputes that happen because of the imaginary lines that we call borders, all the time. Especially in the different countries, like in Europe, because they're so close together, and they kind of build up from different city-states as well. So you have a lot of kind of cutting up of cities. But those essentially what happens whenever you have those kind of issues. They go to a court, they have logical arguments, you have lawyers decide who has the jurisdiction, how do we handle that, how do we do this, and we put some logic to it because we know that these imaginary lines themselves are illogical. Now, those arguments we're making are subjective as well, and it's harder to make the next point I'm trying to make with that example, so I want to switch to the stock market example, where, we were talking about how these subjective perceptions of how that business is going to do or how that stock is going to do starts having an effect on that price. But to me, I see it as the same thing as us trying to study quantum particles, because what is happening there is people trying to fully understand the value of a stock and pulling all the evidence we can have today, using models and algorithms to predict what they'll see tomorrow, using standards and traditions from generations to generations of what we know and how these different numbers affect how a business works. And that's what's causing the crashes. The crashes happen when we realize, shit, we completely overestimated what this value is actually going to be. We didn't take into account the fact that there is a virus that's going to possibly have huge effects on the day-to-day consumerism of all of the global population. And so now we got to take that into account, and everyone's rushing mad to, realize that there's some value that's probably going to be lost to most of these companies because of this situation. And so while the behavior is illogical, it's partly because we don't have all the evidence necessary to accurately determine the value of these stocks. But the value of these stocks does end up being measurable, because it ends up being like, the revenue generated by these companies, the amount of money that they can dole out in dividends to their stockholders. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, well, I kind of jumped the ship when I talked about like stocks and stuff, but regardless, I would say that like at every step of the way when it comes to like what you just described, I would say that there's like this bridge of belief. Like you have to believe in like that money's worth anything. You have to believe that companies are worth anything. You have to believe like so many different things in order for everything to exist and for it to be real. For there to be like data points that tell you, that can help you predict like what's gonna happen, right? I mean, like I'm going on about like, we used to like back our money with gold, and then we switched to paper currency, which is just backed by word from a government that like, I got this, and governments can go in debt, and they got this, right?
But yeah, so yes, like the value we put in money is dependent on our belief that it's valued at something, though that value is difficult to measure and understand, but is real at the same time. Because with my money, I can pay for a cleaning service and now get more time in my day. With that money, I can buy food at the grocery store, and now I don't have to work to make that food. And so some theorists kind of
I believe in
theorize that the
capitalism.
value of
It's fine.
money, well, that the physical value of money is time. That's what we're paying for, and that's what we're getting when we give away money or take money. And what that time is subjective and dependent on, people's belief on that money. It's also part of the reason, it feels very believable, is that you also need an institution that can maintain that economy or that currency.
Yeah.
And so our trust and belief in the consistency or survivability of that institution starts to get baked into what we value that money. Like, there's still logic and reason and some connection to reality for these models you're describing. I think, which I'm not sure if you're trying to argue that there isn't.
I'm not arguing that there isn't.
Yeah.
I'm just arguing about the fact that they're, in many ways, they're symbolic, but they also represent an aspect of reality, and that aspect of reality might not have like a direct, connection, right? Like a spatial connection.
I guess one question I want to ask is, do you think in a perfect world they could? Like, is the gap between the reality they represent and what we think they represent purely a perceptual issue?
I'd say that like if there was only like a one world government, then we could treat everything as just like what it was. Like, and I mean, like and then we would find out like what that credit of it is, right? You know how like in Star Wars they have like credits and it's just like one credit.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, I'm sure that like there's also like planets that have their own like forms of currency, but I'd like to think that like a lot of like our money issues are because we have to like freaking trade between countries and stuff.
Yeah.
And we kind of like hold like one currency as like the base, and then like everything else is like some funky math. I mean, I don't really think that that's how like reality works. I think that at a certain point, we're mostly kind of like paying for like how convenient it is for like certain people to be able to like produce certain things and then give them to us, right? Because I mean, like countries specialize in things.
Ish. Yes. The real goal would be to diversify those specializations and, specialize on a lot of things.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm talking about like in the ideal world where there's no countries, where there's only like one United States of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't you say that, I mean, there could just be like open trade everywhere?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think so. I think that'd be a lot easier and less kind of policies to deal with. I do think the goal of the UN and the international, what is it called? International Monetary Fund, the IMF, is to reach that level of openness. I think since the World War II, we realize how interconnected all our behaviors are, and so we're trying to bake that in.
Yeah.
Reduce the friction between governments. I think it's difficult to step out of the nations we currently have.
Well, here, let me just like say one thing, right? So, like let's say like during like the age of exploration, like countries believed in like mercantilism, right? They believed that it was like a zero-sum game. Like there was like a limited amount of gold in the world, and the more gold you have like in your vault, the better off you are, right? In this like war of nations. So as you can imagine, like everybody was trying to like explore everywhere and get all the gold. El Dorado happened. And then like Spain ended up like bringing like so much gold into like their country that they ended up like causing like inflation, and they fucked themselves up. Right?
Yes.
So that kind of like happened because their perception of value lined up with reality up until a point, right? It lined up with reality when gold was scarce in Europe, and it did mean something. But then at a certain point, when they hit too much gold, then their representation of reality and their concept of value ended up causing them disaster.
Yes.
So all I'm saying is that our concepts of money are real right now. You know, we don't know what's going to happen like once we reach the singularity and AI takes over everything. And you know, it kind of reminded me of like something that like Andrew Yang like talked about like back when he was still in the race. He was saying that like a lot of the things that we're discussing kind of like are old ideas, right? Like more like the left and the right, like capitalism versus socialism.
Yeah.
That a lot of these concepts are not going to matter once automation really takes off, and that we have to start thinking about the new politics of the new era as us versus the Terminators.
I don't disagree, but I think we are still a long ways away from being kind of this post-scarcity,
I don't know, man.
You know.
I feel like you can never tell what era you're living in while you're living in that era.
Sure.
You know, like I believe like years from now in the textbooks we're gonna be like the pre-post scarcity era right now.
But because I think the thing is, it feels that way because we're in the United States and we have it the best out of almost everybody.
We're living in California in the United States, so we're like at the edge of the wave.
Yeah.
See, when you think about it, like this is as far as white people got. Like this is it.
I mean, we're Athens.
Yeah, maybe you can say like Alaska, but not.
Yeah.
So I remember like in AP Gov or in AP US, they talked about how like California was kind of like an experimental state, where like a lot of like laws that like ended up like passing like in the rest of America first kind of started here in California. I mean, maybe that was like a California bias, but
yeah.
But still, I mean, like,
I think a lot.
I mean, we're not the first ones to legalize marijuana, but we did it pretty fast.
We did. We were definitely not the first. Like the third or fourth. I don't know.
But I mean, they were all kind of like West Coast states.
Yeah. But I like. What I'm trying to say is that our perception of how advanced the world is currently is biased.
It's biased, but like, don't you think that like it's gonna catch up? Like to me, like I felt like, you know, like growing up in TJ, I felt like culture was trickling down, right? Like we would get like all like the American shows like a few years later after they got like dubbed in Spanish.
Yeah.
And I felt like culture would like catch up, like a lot of the things that I would see like in the U.S. like a few years later I would see them in TJ. And I feel like when I lived in San Diego, I felt like culture would catch up from like LA, because I felt like we would like get a lot of like our slang and music from LA, and like our clothes and stuff. And so, but now I'm living in LA, and I feel like culture is like happening like in my own eyes, you know, and it's like catching up to me like immediately.
Partly is. That's also a very LA thing to say.
I am like a biased human being, but like I feel like you're too quick to judge my subjectivity, you know.
It's the complacency in the subjectivity, I think.
I feel like there's no complacency. Like my whole way of being is to intake new information and build a new way of seeing things that can equally explain everything that I know and also explain the things that I'm seeing.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of the times, the things that I'm seeing have explanations based around the things that I already know. And I feel like that's just based around the fact that everything has an origin.
Pretty sure there's a fallacy name for that. Or at the very least, it's when you're a hammer, everything is a nail.
Perhaps, but I mean, like, that's why, like, I would like to discuss these things with you.
Yeah.
But I think that I just
Reshape our
happen to like know a
tools.
lot of things,
Yeah. Well,
and
that's fair.
I feel like they might be things that you don't know about.
Yeah.
So it might be that if you did know, it would be like it would be pretty easy to make the same logical like steps to get to that conclusion.
Yeah. I want to circle back because I don't think we ever answered this. The in a perfect world could like is the subjectivity in the value we put in money like all because the whole concept is just a lie and it's subjective and there's
It's
no
not
way
a
to
it's
to
not
really
a lie, Nahum. It's a meta truth.
whatever word we want to call it.
I'd say
Or is it just a data issue? Like, we don't have the right data points yet to arrive at a true value that is representative of something real in reality.
well to me like you can get a data point about something that's not real, right? Like like in the Church of Scientology, how they measure like those like totens or tetons that are inside your body that like or like how many like dead alien ghosts are inside your body causing you psychological stress.
Yes.
And it turns out to just be like some like combination of like a lie detector with like one less thing, and it measures like a bunch of shit and comes up with a number.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like I feel like that is what objective reality is, right? Like it's a tool to get to like what question we want answered. I mean, to answer a question that we want answered. So we have to be the ones who ask the question. And I'd say that if you're asking questions about money, we can get like some clear objective results about money. But that doesn't change the fact that we all have to believe in the axiom of money. And I would say that like in a perfect world, there would be no money. There would just be bread and fish for everybody.
Again, we're fairly far from thinking of life as a post-scarce
I mean,
world. It seems like at the very least 10 years.
at the very least 10 years. I feel like I'm riding the wave, bro.
Like
Life seems plenty.
I guess like because what I'm trying to ask is like I think to me like money and value are they're real. They're a way to measure the scarcity of products, right? At least that's the goal, whether it
That's the
succeeds
goal.
or not.
Look, but to me, like, I see things as tools, right? Like when you build a car engine, you have to take into account that like 60% of the energy is gonna go off into like heat and noise and all types of things that are not what's pushing your car forward.
Yeah, it'll have waste.
So I imagine that every other tool also has like some waste just because of entropy. So like let's say that like the gold standard had the waste of like the fact that like oh wait, it's not as scarce as we thought it was, right? Like it didn't really like represent like what they wanted it to represent in the right way.
But that's like to me that's not that makes money and value not a subjective thing but a real thing that we have a very difficult time measuring because we don't have all the data points.
Yeah, but the real thing that we're trying to get to is value, which is an ideal. And it might be that we don't have any in reality what we want is reality. Like when you spend money on something, what you want is the reality of the burger. Like you don't care about like the chef taking his time and like like SpongeBob kissing the pickles goodnight before he puts them in your burger.
Yeah.
Like you care about like I want a burger right now. Like here's my money. Like here, give it to me. Like money is like reality of like I want to get to the moon. Pay for that shit.
Well, it's and I guess in that sense, its definition is it is like if we had a machine that could read every human's brain at every moment and gather all of their desires and things that they want and put that into some function, we can gather like the total true,
Nahum,
value that could be generated based on the resources we actually do have.
Nahum, what you're describing is the human instrumentality project, and I will not let you walk down those steps. It will cause too much trauma and pain for humanity. What you need to understand is that true happiness lies within, and you can join us on the mountaintop, Nahum. We will clap for you.
I don't know. I have a hard time calling these concepts subjective, outside of the way we try to.
But this is where I would posit that when you're a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, and I would say that you're like a stats guy, and as much as like that seems to be like the main interest that I gather from like what you spend your time on and how you arrange your arguments. And I'd say that like it would be very beneficial for a stats guy for like these certain things to be real.
But see, no, because I think it's unfair to call statistics a hammer. I think statistics are the concept of tools, and statistics is the collection of all of these tools we can use to describe reality. Because at the end of the day, statistics is a language whose goal is to describe relationships and patterns, which might be humanly biased, but seems to be kind of the best way to describe reality in terms of the patterns and things that we can observe about it. Or do you want to find the underlying patterns based on the things that we observe from it? And statistics is the language to describe that. And to me, it does seem like those underlying patterns are possibly reality. And understanding those patterns is possibly knowledge.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you on a fundamental level. What I just bring forward to the table is that that might just be one of the slices of the sphere going through the flatland.
No, but that's kind of what I keep getting at, and the reason why I hesitate to call these concepts like purely subjective and like man-made, because I think there is some underlying pattern that exists beyond the human, at least. I don't know if to say at least beyond consciousness. We still haven't answered the question of whether the only reason there is a reality in a universe is because consciousness. For those anthropocentric individuals out there, but yeah, that's kind of what I'm trying to get at. Like, yes, our models are probably 80% flawed, and we have like 80% waste because of these models, but there is still some input, that's coming in, and some equation that's happening, and some output that happens because of it. It feels like
to that brain in a bat of yours.
Yes.
How does it know what it knows? One might wonder.
Hey, people have been wondering for 5,000 years, at least. That we know of.
Yeah, at least.
Yeah.
I would say that. Well, look, we're here, and dinosaurs are still here, because chickens and crows are still dinosaurs, and crows are pretty smart. Okay, so they can like make tools and figure shit out.
Yeah.
And they know how to fuck with us. They can develop like grudges, and they can develop friendships as well. Like there's some crows that became friends with like a little girl and would bring her presents. Oh, and they realized which presents she liked more, and they would go for those ones more. So like things that were like more like unique and shiny and like man-made, as opposed to the things that were just nature-made. So, so these crows were able to develop like pretty high levels of concepts.
Yeah.
And let me remind you, they're not mammals, so like they're pretty separated from like our tree of life. And yeah. I mean, like at the end of the day, we're all what is it like? Fucking like we got like backs. What is that like? We got vertebrates. We're like vertebrates. You know,
What?
we're vertebrates.
Oh,
We have a
oh,
vertebrae.
Yes.
And you know we share like more things like in common like within life. But,
Yeah.
You know, but I'm just saying that these things end up being parts of consciousness when it develops intelligence, right? So it seems like there is a level of intelligence to consciousness, or a level of consciousness to intelligence. More say, that's more what I would want to say. More that there's a level of consciousness to intelligence. That like you might not need any type of intelligence if you're not conscious, right?
Yeah. I think what you're trying to say is that the concepts aren't necessarily dependent on each other, but
Well, more like
or at
from
least
that like one comes before the other. Right?
yeah, consciousness is not dependent on intelligence. I think is what you're trying to say. That consciousness exists apart from intelligence, though intelligence does require consciousness.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
I mean, these are some like very like complex topics. So like I might change my mind on this later.
Well, philosophically, we describe those as
Filibuster.
no, necessary condition and sufficient conditions.
Okay.
So
Nice.
what you're saying, if we put it in a
Break it down, Nate.
somebody who took philosophy 101 definition,
Break it down. Now you're losing credibility. Break it down. Continue.
consciousness is a necessary condition for intelligence, but it is not sufficient. So consciousness alone won't make you intelligent, but it's necessary for intelligence to occur. So I think, I think I 100% agree with that.
Yeah.
And
Well, more what I wanted to say was the fact that perhaps like our like having attained this level of consciousness and having attained this level of intelligence, like we're thinking about things like in a certain way, and that might have something to do with reality, right? When it comes to like what are like the values and concepts that we're holding up, right? You're
Yeah.
talking about money, I'm talking about morality. I'm trying to figure out whether like if the crow ends up like, you know, let's say there's like another meteorite that like hits the earth, and then like freaking crows have to pick up like the ashes of the world. And they form their own like crow societies and stuff like that. And then there's like this whole thing that happens between the white crows and the black crows that we don't really want to talk about anymore. But in the United States of Croatia, they still have to deal with it because some of the southern states don't really want to take down their statues of General E. Crow. But the main thing is like, will that level of intelligence end up having to deal with the same issues like all over again? You know, will it come to the same conclusions? Like, let's say like that morality is objective. Will it figure it out all over again, even post meteorite again?
I think, I think so, but I think because these are problems, or these are things that exist because of consciousness. Because of consciousness, we are asked to question whether our behaviors and choices are right or wrong. And you know, if we go with the what is it, deterministic viewpoint, none of it matters, right? But, you know, getting away from at least, you know, having to conclude that there isn't free will because it's impractical to conclude that. And who knows, because practice might not even be a thing that actually happens. But because we think we have some sort of free will, and because we can observe, perceive, and have some understanding of how that free will interacts with the universe, we're forced to ask ourselves, is the way I'm interacting with the universe right or not? And so I think any conscious being is forced to contemplate that to the extent that they're able to perceive that, or perceive the effect that they have in the universe. And something you said there too, I want to discuss about when something reaches this level of intelligence. I don't know that intelligence is. I don't know that consciousness is forced to bring out more intelligence to be more conscious.
Well,
Like there's a theory from some of the ayahuasca elders that
all right, that's how you want to start your evidence. Okay, nice source, bro.
I never.
Or like which ayahuasca elders?
There's some theories that because of our intelligence, we've actually lost some amount of consciousness to the universe. That animals and other creatures who aren't as intelligent are able to perceive a lot more of the communication happening in a very spiritual way between the plants and the animals, right? And
I mean, there's something to that, but like,
yeah,
there's some car engines are more efficient than others.
to at least at the very least get away from the to at the very least get away from the spiritual argument. There's the the trees that are around you will emit different chemicals and aromas that will have different effects in your brain that create different conscious or different emotional and physiological effects, right?
Yeah, I don't want to dig into that one too much, but I give that there's things.
Yeah, but so like but at least the theory is that we might actually be losing some consciousness because of our intelligence. So
no, well, I don't consider it to be consciousness. I consider it to be like some part of some perception of reality, because like our perception of reality is like based around like the part of the wavelengths of light that we can see, the range of sound waves that we can hear, the palette of things that we can taste. There's so many like limitations to like what we perceive. And I do feel like some drugs open your mind to like different perceptions.
But I don't know that consciousness isn't that. Like,
what?
And no one knows what it is, so we can't say for certain. But to me, it seems that consciousness is just that, a perception of the universe and of reality. Like, a weird perception of it, like a rock definitely feels when something hits it, but it's not aware that something hit it.
I agree about that as well. So but see, like I see the intelligence aspect of it as something that like that seems to develop from natural selection, right? Like something that totally fits into like our into wanting like your genetic code to prosper for as long as possible. Because I feel that with our intelligence, we're able to come up with views of life that might be like decades like down the road. Like when it comes to like say like how we're worrying about global warming right now. Mm-hmm. Like it's not like dinosaurs like got together in the like millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of years that they were here, and build like a freaking like radio dishes that were able to like see the asteroid and got all their money together and sent out dinosaur Bruce Willis to go take that shit down.
Okay, well, we're recording it so we don't have to write it down, but we'll write down this idea for a YouTube video. What? Because I'm just picturing the corral of... Is corral a good word for this? Is there a word for a group of dinosaurs
together? Republicans.
Well, I'm just picturing a bunch of dinosaurs in lab coats sitting around a table discussing the existential threat that are these rocks flying in space. Just like very heated arguments.
It would be kind of like the snake jazz episode.
Yeah.
The snakes. They're like Rick and Morty did it. But like, before that, like the Simpsons did it. And before that, before that, Plato did it. Or no, like Homer did it.
And Shakespeare and...
Oh, wait, but like if Homer Simpsons... Oh, my God. The Simpsons did
it. Was there some... What do you think was the intent of naming him Homer?
Homer? I'd say that it's because it's a funny name, most of all. But aside from that, like I'd say that it's some type of joke. I'd say like I'd say that like a lot of people like in high school had to read like the Odyssey and they learned about Homer, and so I'd say like naming a stupid guy after like a guy that's considered great is kind of like ironic.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Because Homer's not supposed to be great. He's supposed to be average.
Yeah.
So I'd say that Homer, like the concept of Homer as like a one figure, like he didn't exist. You know, like he's a collection of a bunch of different what would you call them, like bards? You know, people that like pass down stories.
Do we know that for sure?
It's not that we don't. It's just that it seems unlikely.
Yeah.
And it's like
Fair.
like you know, like Homer's not Jesus. You know, we can just say like, nah, he's probably not real.
Yeah. That's fair.
Like,
But yeah, going back to the discussion, I think a lot of these things that I consider objective and that have some objective reality is because I think there is science to consciousness. There's some measurability to consciousness. It's just we're so far away from figuring it out.
no, I think that we did figure it out. It's just that we like the representations of like how we figured it out are very symbolic.
I think it's figured out in the same way that some ancient Greek reading Socrates and Plato would have eventually thought of the idea that, hey, what if that giant glowy thing is like really hot plasma that's held together because it's so heavy everything wants to like crash into it, you know? Like,
Yeah,
I imagine
that's like the Lion King made a joke about that. I don't know if you noticed, but like Pumbaa is saying like, well, Pumbaa asked like Timon like, oh, what do you think the stars are? And like Timon says like something like stupid, and Simba says something stupid, and Pumbaa was like, oh, I thought they might just be like giant burning clouds of gas, you know? And everybody's like, Pumbaa, no, that's ridiculous, right?
there's the one theory that I always think is funny is the moon. They thought was, I think all of the objects they thought were bowls with fires inside of them.
Yeah.
Which I thought was an interesting one.
But I mean, like, isn't like the Earth kind of like filled with molten metals?
But like a concave bowl, like that you put your cereal in.
Yeah, but I mean, like
spinning around and
yeah, but we're just a bunch of spheres, like a bunch of billiard balls.
Yeah.
I feel like whatever you think is like is ridiculous is based
Some
around like
evidence.
what's not.
Which I think perfectly encapsulates what I'm trying to say about where we're at with consciousness. I think we're there. I think we're throwing all these ideas, and because we exist in it, we live it, we can see it, or at least feel it, we are able to arrive at conclusions that might be 20% right, 30% right, but we're still at that state where we're 5,000 years from physically seeing it through a telescope, right? Or physically sending a machine out there to capture the data up close.
But like my understanding of it is that we don't need to wait for us to get to that 100% mark, because I don't even believe in the 100% mark. See, look, okay, like let me give you this one example, right? See, I hate rating women, right? Like I don't think that should be a thing. Mm-hmm. But like I feel like that was always like a thing. Like, hey, like what do you think that girl is? Like, like she like anywhere from 1 to 10, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I noticed that nobody ever marks like a 10 because they don't want to limit their rating system. Right?
Yeah.
Right. They want to keep that 10 as like an elusive like goal. You know, perhaps it's like, you know, some girl that doesn't even exist. You know, it's like some girl that's just like in their head.
Well, I mean, I would say it's the people Hollywood tells us are beautiful and they don't really exist because most of us aren't making money to go to the gym every day.
No, but also like they get fixed up with like CGI and shit. You know?
Yeah.
That's like their crow's
they're not.
feet
They're not real. That's
the main thing. That any girl that you see like in real life, if you look at her, you know, like there might be like some things that go against your idealized version.
Yeah.
But I mean, for me, like I prefer, instead of a multiple choice test, I prefer like an open answer.
Open-ended answer.
Yeah.
But see, because and the we're not gonna get anywhere with it, but I think that's the point of contention. I do think there is 100%
So some
There.
girls are 10s and some girls are not. Heard it here first. Nahum rates women and the A's all around.
You can send your complaints over to Hectorial Maximus. What's your
No, don't
Instagram?
reveal my shit, bro. I'm not gonna do that.
You gotta put it in the liner notes.
When
you know?
the time
like,
is needed.
hosted by Nahum at the Nahum.
At the
Hector,
Nahum.
Yeah.
Nah, I'm fine.
You gotta build up the social media brand.
No, man, you gotta go underground.
But yeah, I mean, but I don't think we're gonna get anywhere with that question because no one fucking has a clue whether there is 100% or not.
Look. Let's say this. That rating system comes from kind of like an illogical thought about attractiveness,
Yes.
right? Which is completely subjective.
It's a shitty model.
It's a shitty model, but what's not subjective is the fact that there is attraction, right? And that attraction is necessary for procreation, which is necessary for the prolonging of life, which is necessary for the prolonging of consciousness, which is necessary for the consciousness to be able to wonder what rating system is required in order for consciousness to be able to prolong itself, in order for it to think about it again. And it's cyclical.
Mm-hmm. So,
despite the fact that it's not a proper system, and let me remind you, I like open answers. I'm different, girl.
Yes.
So the main point should be that it's not a proper model, but it has some relation to reality, in the same way that a car engine, it doesn't 100% do what we want it to do, but as long as it does 30% of what we want it to do, then it serves our needs. And also, we have global warming now. But I'm hoping that because we were able to drive around all over the world, we're gonna find what solves global warming, right?
But yeah, I mean, I'm trying to make sure I understand that what you're saying there is just that although the models we have are imperfect, they can get us some way there.
Incremental. Obamacare. That's why I started with Obamacare.
Incremental improvements.
Yeah.
Yes.
Did I get you? Yeah. Did you just get Obama'd?
Oh, shit. That was my head
What you just heard was reality warping around Nahum, because he finally realized what Obama actually means.
Shit.
Did you just get Obama'd?
I just got Obama'd.
Nice.
Thanks,
I think
Obama?
We can end it with that.
That's fair. Sweet. Oh, and don't forget to check out Audible. They're not sponsoring us or anything. Just feels like
Taking back they won't remind you. We've been learning
I think
for far
Audible
too.
stopped
I've been
sponsoring everything because the people that were going to hear about it
I've been learning the things I've done.
Brilliant.com and all that
I've
stuff.
been
And-
listening.
Yeah. So I'm assuming that